I wanted to welcome everyone to the first of our series for veterans. The goal of this series is to improve quality of life for our veterans. And this is session 1. It was funded by the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. And I'm honored today to have 3 really incredible guests. We're talking about families and relationships. And our guests today all have different perspectives on this. First, we have Bruce Feiler, who's a best-selling author, an expert in strengthening families and creating happy families. And I'll give further introductions in a few minutes. Second, we have Jeremiah Pauley, who's a speaker and spokesperson for Wounded Warriors, and he himself is a vet. And third, we have Welby O'Brien, who's an author, speaker, and founder of her own nonprofit organization called Love Our Vets. And she herself is a caregiver to a disabled vet. This webinar is not intended to serve as or replace or substitute medical advice. You should always look for medical advice, seek it out from your own healthcare professionals. We hope that it touches your lives. I want to thank everyone for tuning in and for all your service, for everything that you do, both the panelists and the guests. My name is Roxanne Black, and I'm the Executive Director of Friends Health Connection, and we're honored to offer this series. So I'm going to begin by really focusing in on each speaker, and then we'll open it up to more of a panel discussion. And Bruce, I'm going to start with you. So Bruce Feiler is the author of 6 consecutive New York Times bestsellers. He's the writer and presenter of 2 primetime series on PBS, and his 2 TED Talks have been viewed more than 2 million times. A native of Savannah, Georgia, Bruce lives in Brooklyn with his wife, Linda Rottenberg, and their 2 twin daughters. His latest book is called Life is in the Transitions, Mastering Change at Any Age. And I'm going to read a brief description of it. A pioneering and timely study of how to navigate life's biggest transitions with meaning, purpose, and skill. Bruce Feiler, author of the New York Times bestsellers, The Secret of Happy Families and Council of Dads, has long explored the stories that give our lives meaning. Galvanized by a personal crisis, he spent the last few years crisscrossing the country, collecting hundreds of life stories in all 50 states from Americans who'd been through major life changes, from losing jobs to losing loved ones, from changing careers to changing relationships, from getting sober to getting healthy to simply looking for a fresh start. He then spent a year coding these stories, identifying patterns and takeaways that can help all of us survive and thrive in times of change. What Feiler discovered was a world in which transitions are becoming more plentiful, and mastering the skills to manage them is more urgent for all of us. The idea that we'll have one job, one relationship, one source of happiness is hopelessly outdated. We all feel unnerved by this upheaval. We're concerned that our lives are not what we expected, that we veered off course, living life out of order, but we're not alone. Life is in the Transitions introduces the fresh, illuminating vision of the nonlinear life in which each of us faces dozens of disruptors. 1 in 10 of those becomes what Feiler calls a life quake, a massive change that leads to a life transition. The average length of these transitions is 5 years. The upshot, we all spend half our lives in this unsettled state. You or someone you know is going through one now. The most exciting thing Feiler identified is a powerful new toolkit for navigating these pivotal times. Drawing on his extraordinary trove of insights, he lays out specific strategies each of us can use to reimagine and rebuild our lives, often stronger than before. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thank you for having me. Thank you for gathering all of us here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to start by asking you, how do you define a happy family?
Well, I chuckle at the question because if my wife were to walk through, and since I'm working from home like everybody else, and I have two high schoolers in the house, you may hear a flute lesson or an acting class or a dancing class above me at any moment in time. My wife were to walk in and she would like, be sure and tell everybody that you wrote about happy families, not because you had one, but because you wanted one. So that's really the situation that I found myself in, probably going back 13, 14 years now. It's like, so as you heard, my wife and I are the parents of identical twin girls. And in those early years, we were what I call playing defense, right? You've got sippy cups and diaper caddies and naps, and everybody's got advice for you, and everybody's a little chaotic and a little frustrated. And when you get through that period and you are in the place in your life where you want to run what I call offense, right? You want to begin to build a family with patterns and rituals and kind of high functioning households. That's when I felt like there's not a lot of advice out there. Like there's a lot of advice for young people and there's certainly advice for teenagers and all that. And so I thought, you know what, we're 100 years into psychology and everyone's frustrated. You know, they call their parents, but their experience is outdated, and they, you know, Facebook their friends, but our friends are just as clueless as we are. And so I thought, well, there's a bunch of knowledge out there about how to make groups and teams work effectively. And so I set out on this journey collecting this wisdom from people out there about how to make families function more effectively. Essentially, the essence of the question was, what are happy families doing right that I can import into my family? And so the answer, that's sort of the backstory. And so I wrote 2 books about that. I spent 10 years writing a column in the New York Times. And I would say in general, what I learned is that high functioning families have 3 things in common. So on the one level, it's absurd, the idea that there's such a thing as a happy family, because some families are big and some are small and some are boisterous and some are quiet, right? Some have boys who love to play their activities. Some have girls like we do and they love to play their activities. Some have a mix. But it turns out that high functioning families do have 3 things in common, and that's sort of the backbone of my work in happy families. They adapt all the time, right? I thought, oh, I'm a dad. I'll come up with 3 rules and we'll follow them. It turns out that you have to be adaptable at all times, because a parent goes off to war, because mom has a presentation, because grandma is having cataract surgery, because this kid is playing sports and that kid has dance practice. So you have to be adaptable is the first thing that high functioning families have in common. The second thing they have in common is they talk a lot about what it means to be part of a family, because if you adapt all the time, you'll go crazy. So you need some set, you know, in my book, I talk about having family meetings and having a mission statement and these ideas that we can potentially get into about sort of, this is what it means to be in our family. These are sort of our, and anybody I think who's been around the military understands the sort of code of conduct. And then the last thing that high functioning families, that happy families have in common, is that they go out and play. And it sounds like the most obvious one, but it's often the hardest one to do, is you make positive memories, so that when you're dealing with the struggles and you're dealing with the challenges, whether it's homework or quarantine or work from home or mornings or afternoons or evenings or whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have some foundation of shared experiences and joyful times that will make the difficult times and the difficult conversations go more easily.
Those are great points, and especially number 3, because I think as we're always, kids are going here and there, and making time for family fun is really important too. So those are all great points. Now you talk about 20 minutes a week, a certain skill or tool or meeting. Can you discuss that a little further and what it's done for your family?
Yeah, so, you know, what we're talking about, I think the frame I would say is this. The frame I would say is that we know, like Jeremiah Welby, if we talked, we know that any habit is not going to get better until you work at it. Your tennis game is not going to get better. Your souffle is not going to get souffle unless you work at it, right? We know that we have to work on our bodies. We now know that we have to work on our relationships. But our families, the thing that we spend most time on, we kind of keep putting to the end of the line. Like the research on siblings show that one of the reasons that siblings fight all the time is because they know that there's no other choice. And so they kind of one tends to be the dominant and one tends to be the passive. And like everybody realizes there's no choice. So our families are the most important source of our happiness. And yet it is the thing that we spend the least amount of time working on. And so kind of a lot of what my work in Happy Families is about is taking time to work on your family. And I'm not talking about 3 hours a day. Okay. I'm talking about, 10 minutes a day in a conversation with a family where you're having a shared conversation. It could be at mealtime, but maybe mealtime doesn't work in your schedule. It can be snack time. And in this case, what we're talking about is 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes a week. In my family, we do this on Sunday afternoons. We've done it for more than 10 years, where we have a family meeting and we sit down and we ask 3 questions. What's working well in our family this week? Where everybody goes around and says, this is what's working well. Okay, we adapted to the start of school. Okay, mom had a business trip and we got through it. Okay, we had to move back our bedtime because somebody had a big presentation. What's working well? The second question, what's not working well? And everybody can say, oh, it turns out mealtime was incredibly chaotic, or people are leaving their clothes on the floor, or the doorbell's ringing and mom's in a Zoom and no one's bothering to answer the phone and mom has to start screaming, which is not good for her Zoom. Right? Whatever it might be, everybody has a chance to talk about what's not working well. And then we talk about, okay, which of the things that is not working well, let's pick 1 or 2 that we can work on this week. And the point is, I call this the Agile Family Manifesto. I gave a TED Talk about this. And the idea is organizations are adapting all the time, right? You can't just say, this is the rules and it's always going to be this way. And you try something, and if it doesn't work, guess what? We're going to meet again in a week. We can adapt it. We can modify it. But it's a commitment. And we had one yesterday, actually, the day that we're taping this. And my kids got off talking about something at school, and I was the one to raise my hand. Remember, this is not your life or my life or mom's life. This is how we're working as a family. That's what we're going to talk about. And so it's just time set aside in the same way that you make time for your workout, you make time for date night, you make time for tennis practice or whatever habit that you're trying to get better at. We're saying family's important. We're going to spend time committed to making it work.
Is there a difference, or is there different advice whether it's a family with 1 child or whether it's a family with 12 children? Did you notice any differences in what you recommend?
Well, paradoxically, I think the family with more children, or by the same vein, a family with divorced parents where there's 2 different families, in an odd kind of way, they know that you can't kind of wing it. I think it's easier to bluff your way through if you have 1 kid because perhaps there's this myth of less kind of chaos going on around the house. So no, I don't. There's no difference in size, in gender, in ethnicity, in region. These are things that high functioning families do well, is they make time for it. The reason I was saying that kind of blended families or divorced families or whatever, or maybe even military families with someone abroad, one of the reasons I think that they have an advantage is they know if you're bouncing back and forth between mom's house and dad's house, or if dad or mom is going to go away for 6 months, then you're going to have to sit down and talk about it because you know that the circumstances are going to change.
And it sounds like, and I listened to some of your TED Talk and I read a lot about you and your work, and wonderful work and very meaningful, that could touch so many lives. But sounds a lot like some of the corporate strategies that we talk about, and even your technique of having meetings, and some of even the military training may be applied in some ways. You're applying it to family life.
Well, yeah, with families, I mean, there's specifically with the military, and I actually was just reorganizing the shelves in my office here in Brooklyn over the weekend, and came upon this study that was done at the Naval Academy on high functioning teams and what teams do well. And so, in fact, I expressly went out in the course of the journey of Happy Families to say, okay, who is let's go talk to Warren Buffett about how to make an allowance. Okay, let's go talk to game designers in Silicon Valley about how to make play. And in this case, let's go talk to the military. Military has, at this point, decades of experience of taking people of different backgrounds and bringing them together in some, with a commitment to camaraderie and self-sacrifice for the sake of the group. So I specifically went out and did that. And then, in fact, the last chapter of my book, Secrets of Happy Families, is called The Green Beret Guide to a Family Reunion. And it's specifically taking techniques that the military does to build kind of esprit de corps and bringing it into families, because it's difficult. With different people with different backgrounds living together is challenging. And so that's a lot of the backbone of that book.
Thank you, Bruce. Welby O'Brien. Welby holds and we'll circle back to all of you then and have questions for all of you. Welby O'Brien holds a master's degree in counseling from Portland State University and a teaching degree from Biola University. Drawing from her own personal experience, she has authored Goodbye for Now, Formerly a Wife, and Love Our Vets, Restoring Hope for Families of Veterans with PTSD. She is also a contributing author to Chicken Soup for the Soul, Divorce and Recovery, Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Spirit of America, as well as Shepherding Women in Pain. Welby initiated and facilitates the national support network called Love Our Vets, PTSD Family Support, and has been reaching thousands with her timely book, Love Our Vets, Restoring Hope in Families of Veterans with PTSD. Welby, you wrote about PTSD, how perplexing it is that no one else seems to get it. We struggle with fear, loneliness, anxiety, and sleepless nights. We question our sanity and have regular hormone checkups. We don't dare tell anyone that we wonder if we made a mistake, and we feel ashamed at the fleeting thoughts of how much simpler life would be without PTSD. But you are not alone. You share with many others, all of us journeying down the same path. Many of us have often been tempted to throw in the towel, and a few have, but even more grow stronger each day, not in spite of PTSD, but because of it. The faith and love that has kept us from falling apart, held us up, comforted and strengthened us, are available to all of us. We need each other. It is in sharing the struggles and growth, pain and healing, tears and joys that encourages us to love our vets even more. There is no greater reward. What is PTSD and what causes it?
Okay, so the first thing about it is PTSD can happen to anyone, not just military-related experiences. And it's a result, or it can result from exposure to an experience that's horrific or life-threatening. And what happens is the whole individual gets locked into emergency survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze survival, and stays permanently programmed in that emergency survival mode at some level for the rest of their life. So 24/7, they live as if that original crisis or an impending crisis could occur at any moment. And it totally affects their ability to cope. So like when something triggers them back into survival mode, which could be anything in an instant, there's no reserve with which to cope. And it's basically people who have experienced something abnormal and they're responding in a survival mode. And in the US alone, it affects millions, along with all those who love them and care about them. And some of the symptoms, the good news is not everybody has all these, but some typical signs are avoidance, anxiety, depression, fear, hypervigilance, numbing, sleep disturbances, substance abuse, relationship problems, withdrawing, putting up walls, and sometimes even attempted suicide or suicidal thoughts. And the good news is we want to let people know, as do, Bruce and Jeremiah and you, that there's always hope. And that is the good news. You can learn to thrive in spite of it. And my husband and I are testimony of that, and I'm grateful.
So what are the first steps that someone can take towards survival and healing, both from your husband, for your husband, and for you?
So if it's a loved one and you see these signs in the person with firsthand PTSD, you can connect with others for good support, which is essential. And you can research, you can learn about it. That was what really, really helped me. I'll do a backstory here and then come back to that. But when I first met my husband, we both came from failed marriages, and we really, really wanted this to work. And I knew that he was an exceptional person. And I remember right off the bat, he told me, he said, Welby, I've got PTSD and I'm all messed up. He used some stronger words than that. But I didn't have a clue. I didn't know anything about PTSD. And so what I did was I found a class at our local VA, and I signed up for that and started going. And I remember coming home that first night all by myself. I had to pull the cart over the side of the road, and I just wept. I had not realized the horrors that so many of our warriors have been through that haunt them day and night. And I had to learn it isn't me. I still have to keep remembering that. I had to learn I can't fix it, which is really hard because I'm programmed to fix everything and everyone. And this one just, I can't fix it. And the third thing I had to remember is to take care of me. That self-care is so essential in the ongoing ups and downs of the battle. So for the loved one, those are important steps. For the person who knows they have PTSD or suspects it, I would say the first thing is to learn what you can and to explore options. And I've heard, and I know maybe Jeremiah probably has some more detailed statistics on this, but I've heard that about 50% of veterans who really need support and help with the PTSD are not reaching out. And I know it takes a tremendous amount of courage to do that, because in the military, you're just programmed to survive, to tough it out, to stick through it. And somehow or other, there just gets to be this toughness that is hard to reach out for help. So learning what you can, reaching out for help, and that's a big step. So maybe start by talking to somebody else who is thriving. And that's what my husband did. He lived with it for almost 40 years before he knew what it was and was willing to take that first step to reach out. And it was that friend of his, a fellow veteran, went with him to a local vet center. And the vet centers are a different type of entity than the VA. The VA can feel overwhelming, and the vet center was a smaller, more homey place. And so that was a good fit for him. And he hooked up with a support group of peers who served the same time and place as he did, and also with a really good counselor. And also what has helped me was to have my own counseling in addition to both of us going for counseling together. So if you can find good support, good counsel, and there are tons of therapies available now that weren't before. This is the time to explore the options. What might work for one person may not for another. So just take those steps and feel it out and see how it goes. And it's a journey. It's not perfect, but it is possible. And I can say now, we've been married for 12 years. I can say It is possible to have a loving, fulfilling relationship in spite of the PTSD. It's not easy, but it's definitely possible and definitely worth it.
Do you feel that you mentioned that a lot of a lot of caregivers don't reach out for help. Do you feel that self-care and acknowledging your own needs makes you an even better caregiver?
Yes, absolutely. Only it takes us a while to get that. And it's ongoing, because even then I forget that. I'm always kind of in go mode and serve mode, and then I usually will burn out or crash and then go, oh yeah. And there's a lot of us who are kind of raised with a mentality that it's not right to put yourself at the top of the list. You gotta do this and serve that, and it's really just the opposite, like you just said, Roxanne. When we take care of ourselves, we all benefit. So if I burn out, I'm no good to anybody. So self-care is definitely an important thing, especially because so many of us, at least initially, felt so overwhelmed and all alone. Nobody I knew was in the world of PTSD when I first started, and I had to connect with the ladies in that group I went to and stayed connected to learn from them, and that's how the group Love Our Vets started, just locally meeting in my living room, and then it expanded to the online support group, and it went to the book. Bruce showed his book, so I'm going to show mine. Love Our Vets. So that book is just filled with the wisdom that I've learned on my journey, along with all the others that I've gleaned from who've been on the road way ahead from me. So yes, definitely self-care is a true priority.
Thank you. Thank you, Welby. Jeremiah. Jeremiah Pauley grew up in the blue-collar town of Massillon, Ohio. I come from a very patriotic family, he says. I remember watching television during Operation Desert Storm and how much I admired those men and women who served. I figured I owed it to them and the many who came before them to dedicate myself to our country. In 1996, he enlisted in the Army, requesting to join the airborne infantry. 10 years later, he was deployed to Iraq. 4 months after that, the unthinkable happened. A roadside IED detonated in his immediate vicinity. The explosion sent shrapnel through his right arm just above the elbow. Another soldier was killed by the bomb. If it weren't for the medics' immediate action, I probably wouldn't have survived either, Jeremiah says now. He was first treated at a hospital in Mosul before being transferred to a medical center in Germany. After a week, he was finally stable enough to be flown to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where he spent another 3 months recovering physically. But that was just the beginning of his journey. His mental recovery would take even longer. Due to his injuries, Jeremiah medically retired from the Army in 2007 as a staff sergeant. The trauma from his experience, combined with survivor's guilt and the sudden end of his decade-long career, left him lost in a dark place. It took years of wandering through that darkness before Jeremiah was able to adapt his mindset and overcome his own negativity. In 2011, he first shared his story from a stage during an open mic night called War Stories, Welcome Home. Jeremiah credits his family with his own inspiration and perseverance. I see my kids smile and it motivates me to be even better, he says. I remember not being a very good father. I'm so grateful I have the opportunity to keep improving. Welcome, Jeremiah. I'm gonna ask
Thanks, Roxanne.
you.
That makes me tear up every time I hear that, because I think about it and I look at my kids now and I just think how blessed I am to just still be a part of their lives. So thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I'm going to ask you some of the same questions I asked Welby, and I wanted you to answer from your perspective. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you define post-traumatic stress? How do you define PTSD? And what's interesting is when I talked to you before, you referred to it as post-traumatic growth. Is there a difference between the two? And how do you define it?
I think the stress for me was this chaos going inside my mind that my heart didn't really understand. I went from being in Iraq looking for bad guys to laying in a hospital bed, depending on someone to basically feed me, from that to being a stay-at-home dad for a 6-month-old baby girl. And all that was very confusing. And trying to learn what to do, when to do it, how to do it, to be someplace there, or pardon me, to be there, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, to learning that the growth side of it, learning that not only did I have to learn how to become a civilian that had these memories of war, but I had to learn how to become a father. And the growth part of it is something that happens every day that gives me the opportunity to learn from my mistakes. So when I go to bed in the evening, I'm thinking about what could I have done today, maybe a little bit better. You know, was there an interaction that I had with my kids where I raised my voice or I yelled, or did we get into an argument about the homework? Because now I'm trying to be not only the stay-at-home dad that's working, but also be that teacher during a quarantine time. So the growth is something that constantly happens, but it gives me the opportunity to constantly look at myself and say, where can I improve and become better?
What are the first steps that you took to transform from that dark place to the mindset you have today?
I took counseling seriously. I think in the very beginning, when I left the Army, I was going to the VA and seeing a counselor, but I really wasn't taking it seriously. I was really just checking a block because someone said, well, you've got PTSD, you better go see a doctor. And I just sat there and just listened to the doctor and talked about my experience. But I didn't really do anything with that knowledge from the doctor outside of that doctor's office. And it wasn't until I was introduced to Wounded Warrior Project that I met a lot of veterans that had similar experiences to mine. And it taught me that I wasn't alone. And I saw some of these amazing things they were doing with their life. And I thought, why can't I do that? And I realized that one, I didn't have my own mind right. So I went back to a different counselor and I started taking it seriously. And I started taking these lessons that counseling was trying to teach me and adapting them to my own life.
So it was a combination of counseling and also you're saying something, I guess, that Welby had said too, connecting with others who understood and finding that support so you know you're not alone. That was a big point too.
Connection was a big thing for me because when I moved back to California after the Army, I was only surrounded by family. And I say only because not one of those people had served in the military. So none of them knew exactly what I was experiencing. And I didn't have anyone around me or near me that had any type of military experience. And so when I was able to connect with people that had served in combat, we were able to trade some of those stories about what it was like and what it's like trying to adjust to life as a civilian, as a spouse, as a parent. And those connections helped me form this mindset that I developed over the years.
What do you think is the difference between how PTSD affected you as an individual and how it affected your family or your family as a whole, including you?
Yeah. I know a lot of people say PTSD is an invisible wound, but it's really something that my family sees every day, you know, whether it's these maybe a small little outburst of anger or a yell or something like that. Learning about what those triggers are that put me in those stressful situations, I think, are something that makes you more self-aware when you start that post-traumatic growth. The family sees it and they know that, well, why is dad acting like this today? What can we do? You know, and in the very beginning, it was, oh, better walk on eggshells because he's having a bad day, you know? And so you try to take that, and you got to take a step back and you say, all right, if it's affecting my family this bad, what am I going to have to do now to make sure that they are part of this healing journey? Because they're just as much a part of the healing as any doctor or any counseling session.
So what could they have done, or what did they do? Whether or not they did it, what do you think families could do besides walking on eggshells? Are there tips that you would give to families to help those going through PTSD?
I think the first thing is that the person with PTSD has to acknowledge it and take responsibility. I think then they have to develop a plan with the family involved and talk about how best can the family heal from this event as well, because it's just as much the family's problems that this person is dealing with. We've got to include the family. I think family counseling is a great option for that. Bringing the family together. I like what Bruce said about the playtime. We make sure that we get out every week and we go do something fun outside with us and the dogs, and we play and we run and ride bikes or work out or whatever it is. We've got it. We can't allow that person to just sit and be quiet with those demons alone. It's so healthy to have the entire family together through that journey, I think. It's got to start with that self-responsibility and asking the family, okay, how can I become better? Should we all go to counseling together? Should we all go sit outside for 20 minutes and talk about how everything is affecting everyone? Just continuing to ask those hard questions.
And so what Bruce was saying about meeting as a family and taking time to have those family check-ins, that relates here so critically.
Absolutely. Because if you're just going through the motions, okay, dinner's ready, time to get up, go to school. Did you do your homework? Great. That doesn't work. You know, a healthy family is talking to one another. They're a part of one another's lives. They're helping each other. You know, I'm taking my kids outside and saying, okay, we're doing yard work today. You know, it's your yard too. This isn't just, you know, my house. This is your house. Let's clean together. We do more together so that we understand each other better. And I think it helps the whole family dynamic.
I'm going to take a step back real quick. And do you think, is there any advice you would give to veterans before they're deployed that could help strengthen the family or help prepare for whatever is to come?
Yeah, I think check your ego and understand that you're going to be a different person when you return than when you left. And understand that it is a very big sign of strength to ask for help. You know, my lowest of the low, you know, when I was contemplating suicide, I really didn't know what to do or where to go. Have something in place for when that deployment is over, of a place that you can go to for your resources. I think as veterans, one of the biggest missed opportunities we realize is that we are our own best advocate. So do the research before the deployment to talk about where is a counseling center that I can get involved in, not only for me, but for my family as well. And have those on standby so that when you come back, it's not just, hey, here's the welcome home, welcome mom, dad home, let's get back to having dinner together and things like that. All right, next thing up is tomorrow, all of us are going to go do this counseling session together. Have stuff like that ready. Arm yourself with everything that you can to be healthy. After I was wounded, I went through surgery and physical therapy in order to adapt to my physical wounds, but mentally and emotionally, there wasn't anything there. So be prepared to do something for yourself when you come back.
That's great advice. Before, I'm going to turn to all of you now, but before I do, Bruce, do you have anything you want to add to anything that was just said? And then Welby, I'll ask each of you the same.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jeremiah, for that beautiful story, and Welby, what a journey you both have been on. I want to pivot actually just for a second to put from Happy Families, my work on that, to what I've been doing recently, which you teed up at the beginning, which is talking to people who go through major life transitions, because that's really, in a way, so relevant to what we've been talking about here, right? You mentioned that I went through this period of time that I call a life quake, right? Which is a massive moment in time when life was coming at me in all directions. I got cancer. I almost went bankrupt. My dad, himself a military veteran in the Navy in the 1950s, got Parkinson's and tried to take his own life 6 times in 12 weeks. And I started a storytelling project with my dad where every Monday morning I would send him a question about his life. Tell me about the house you played with, the toys you had, tell me the house you grew up in, the toys you played with, how'd you join the Navy, how'd you meet mom? And my dad sort of used this storytelling experience. And then I ended up sending him a question every Monday morning for 5 years until this man who had never written anything longer than a memo backed into writing an autobiography. And it was this one thing that kind of gave him life again and something to look forward to. My knee accidentally hit my printer. So you're hearing a blank page print out. Anyway, we're all working from home. But inspired by this and hearing a lot of people tell the stories like the ones we've heard here today, I set out on this journey of interviewing hundreds of people across the country who've been through what I call life quakes, which is these moments of kind of wrenching personal change and how they responded to it. It could be the divorce. Welby mentioned this is a second marriage. I don't know if you were a widower or you got divorced, but that was a life quake. Being married to someone who's struggling with PTSD. Jeremiah, your story, a life quake for you, also for your family. And then I spent a year coding these stories and sort of kind of what I've identified, and what my book, Life is in the Transition, has is a model for how to navigate this, these types of periods. And kind of, so what I wanted to say, I was struck, Jeremiah was talking about accepting it. So what I want to say is that going through a life quake, the life quake can be voluntary or involuntary, but the life transition must be voluntary. I mean, Jeremiah said it so well. You have to choose. Welby, you guys leaned in together and said, we're going to go through this together. We're going to transition into this new life. And those transitions have 3 phases. The first is what I call the long goodbye, where you are accepting the emotions, marking them, in some way acknowledging that the past is not coming past. Then you go through what I call this messy middle, where you shed certain habits and create new ones. Again, Jeremiah described that so beautifully. We're going to create new rituals. We're going to develop new ways of living. This is what turns, what turns trauma into post-traumatic growth. What turns a life quake into a positive life transition is developing new habits, and creativity is one. I talked to a man named Zachary Herrick, who grew up, who was born actually to a crack mother in Kansas. He was Black, raised by a white family, went into the military, had his face shot off by the Taliban, 31 surgeries between the tip of his nose and the tip of his chin, including having his tongue sewn back on, and went through suicide ideation. His mother had to move from Kansas near Walter Reed when he was got out to help him transition. He started to cook because he couldn't eat normal food. He started to write poetry, and he started to paint. He said, like that guy Jackson Pollock, like him. He said to me, I used to splatter the enemy with bullets, and now I splatter the canvas with paint. And I said, if I talked to your high school football playing self about this, he was like, I thought it was stupid. And yet it helped bring him back to life. So people turn to astonishing acts of creativity. So there's the long goodbye, the messy middle where people shed and start new habits. And then there's this new beginning where people unveil their new selves and find a new source of meaning, whether it's, in the case of Jeremiah, his family, or helping wounded warriors. In the case of Welby, inviting those people to your home. That's an act of, we're going to go through this together. We're going to find a team to go through these transitions. So there are kind of, what I want to say is exactly what we've just been hearing, which is when this first happens to you, you feel isolated and alone. I'm the only person, I'll never get through it. But there is a lot of wisdom out there. And for those of us who look at it, and I've spent years, half a decade talking to people who went through experiences like this, there are patterns and themes and takeaways that can help you go through it more effectively.
Jeremiah, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, if I would have known 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, that I have to replace that pain and negativity with something, and continue to experiment to find healthy ways to replace it, whether it's Like I found out that I love to cook and grill, and I love not only to exercise, but I love teaching exercise. And, you know, I love all these things that I just, well, yeah, that was fun and okay. But I got on a bike and I'm like, wow, that was a lot of fun. I can go ride a bike, experiment with healthy ways to cope with post-traumatic stress. I've had friends that are gardeners, that are bird watchers, that are doing all these amazing things that they all say the same thing to me. 5 years ago, I would have asked my high school self, no way I'm going to do that. But it's just amazing what we're capable of when we go out and look for ways to replace that pain and negativity. And I think experimenting with healthy ways to do it, it just leads to so much post-traumatic growth. Continue to find something that you can get passionate about, excited about. One of my other biggest things was community service projects. I used to think that not serving in the Army was the worst thing that could happen to me. You know, growing up, my dad was the type of man that would give you the shirt right off his back. And he would say, if you're ever in the position to help someone, you should do it. So I started going to local community service projects. But not only that, I took my kids with me. And so here we are, you know, in underserved areas, helping refurbish a playground, building a fence, you know, picking up trash, just doing things like that just felt good to give back because we were able to. But then also taking it a step further and bringing out fellow veterans. Hey, what are you doing on Saturday? Nothing. Cool. We're going to go swing some hammers and pick up some trash. Really? Yeah, let's go. And then to see these veterans' eyes light up because now they're able to give back again. Continue to experiment. Find ways to get involved. Don't feel like you're alone. Find organizations. Know that you're your own best advocate. Get involved somewhere, somehow. Include your family in everything. Take time for yourself for the self-care, but include your family. Let them be a part of this process.
And Welby, would you like
Well,
to?
I wanted to say thank you, Jeremiah, for your service and sacrifice. My husband, when he came back, there was none of that. And they're just now getting that, the Vietnam veterans. So, and Bruce, everything you're doing to touch lives and deal with your own challenges, and Roxanne too. So just one thing to tuck in, to add to, I'm just soaking this all in. I'm looking forward to watching it again and taking notes. For me, faith and love have been really key. And personally, I'm thankful that my husband and I have that. We share. It's been a big help, a big encouragement. I'd say faith is connection with God, and the love is a connection with others, as we've already established. So just wanted to say how important those two are in my life personally.
Thank you. I have two final questions that I wanted to ask. One is, this relates a little to my own life, but I think it relates to a lot of people's lives. So I picture, well, let's take Bruce's family. So Bruce has 4 people in his family. So it's the parents, mother, father, and 2 daughters. So I picture almost a circle of everyone holding hands, everyone being equal. When someone goes through a trauma, so I'm going to share my story real quick. I was diagnosed with lupus when I was 15. I've been in and out of hospitals my whole life. I've had 2 kidney transplants and lymphoma. So when I was in college, I was on dialysis, and, you know, so my family, I had 2 older sisters, but suddenly the family shifted to, I became the one kind of in need. And it could build, in need of support or in need of someone being there for me. Sometimes I wasn't able to do certain things. So that balance of 4 people holding hands or 5 people holding hands in a circle suddenly kind of shifted, and the circle became bent. It became an oval, or it became misshapen because one person needed more help than the others. So in those situations, how do you set boundaries? How do you approach that as a family perspective in a healthy way when one person in the family whether it's PTSD, whether it's physical illness, whatever it is, needs significantly more assistance and presence than the others. How could a family rally around, and where do you set healthy boundaries too for each member of the family still getting their own needs and making sure their own needs are met so that you could be there for this other person? Kind of like with caregiving, but from a family perspective.
Let me ask you, let me hop in here and ask you a question. So you mentioned that you got lupus when you were 15, and at that time that the family, the alleged family circle, I'll get to that in a second, was misshapen toward you. You're obviously not 15 now. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but in the years since, have other people been through a time of need?
Yes.
Okay. So my response to that story is that what you are doing is you're normalizing the circle and abnormalizing the bentness. And what I'd like to say is that the bentness is what is normal. Okay. So that, you know, a kind of big, we've now mentioned it 3 times. I spent a year coding these stories. And one of my favorite questions to ask people is, what shape is your life? And the reason that I got interested in that is because we were all taught to expect what we think of as a fairy tale version of our lives, is that our lives are going to go like this. Okay. We came from nothing and then we worked hard and that we have a lot. And that's the fantasy life, the linear life that we have been led to expect. And if there's one thing I've learned in the last 15 years of my own personal life and talking to hundreds and hundreds of people, like all 4 of us gathered here, there's actually 4 people in Life is in the Transitions who have lupus that I talk to, is that the linear life is dead. The idea that you're going to have one home and one job and one relationship and one spirituality and one sexuality or whatever, that fantasy turns out to be a myth, and it's gone, and it's been replaced by what I call the nonlinear life that has many ups and downs. Okay, so your family, what's in your head that needs to be reshapen is that the idea that your family is this perfect circle and that you were bent. Everybody's bent in that family. Everybody's bent at some time, in some way, and at some time or another. So if you happen to be in a family and you are not bent at the moment, look around you because somebody else is bent. I mean, look at the people gathered here. This is just a random collection of people. Okay, and look what we've heard here. We've heard divorce, we've heard trauma, we've heard PTSD, okay? We've heard family problems, we've heard regret about fatherhood, we've heard cancer, we've heard suicide, we've heard lupus. I mean, like, we've only been talking for 53 minutes. If we talked another 53, each of us would have 6 more that we haven't gotten around to talking about. So the point is that everybody is bent in some way, okay? And that life is about, when you're bent, trying to find help standing up. And if you happen to be standing up for a moment before you get bent again, finding someone else who's bent and helping them up, okay? So the aberration is the circle. The reason my book is called Life is in the Transitions, you mentioned it earlier, we spend half of our lives in transitions. If we look at these as periods you have to suffer and grit and grind and resilience your way through, we're missing the opportunity. I mean, look at what Jeremiah just said. Incredible growth in a time of pain. What did Welby just say? Okay, 2 people who knowingly went into a relationship, knowing that there would be pain and realizing that they could find joy in getting through it and comfort and release and help and relief in going through it together. There's no such thing as a perfect circle. Everybody's bent. Find help if you're bent. If you're not, reach out to someone else and offer them help.
Thank you.
I'd like to chime in on that too, just briefly. It's important for everybody in the family to stay tuned. What do I need? And not to just think because one person is in more of a crisis mode, then my needs are not important. Just first of all, stay tuned to our needs and then be able to express them and to encourage the entire family, whether it's, weekly meetings or what it is, to have, that's not only okay, it's absolutely necessary for everybody's needs to be validated and addressed.
Thank you. looking at the bigger picture right now, and this is my final question, we're all going through COVID. We're all going through a challenging time. We're all very much bent right now. Any words about that, whether it's tips or how this, I mean, all the tips apply, but how would you apply this to the greater whole of us as like a national family, a worldwide family, and everything that we're going through? Anything you'd like to say?
You know, this one is actually very interesting because, you know, as someone who has really struggled with post-traumatic stress, you know, I know what it's like to self-isolate, which back in March, which is what everyone had to do, you know, stay at home. That was the thing, you know, so I think veterans can maybe offer a unique perspective here. So in my darkest days, the one thing that I have now that I think we all have that I didn't have then was hope. Hope that things can and will get better, you know, and we're learning this as we go. You know, we're learning now, okay, certain restrictions in certain pockets are being lifted. Oh, there's hope that it's going to get better. Oh, I can go out to this restaurant to eat. I just can't go inside. That's better. That's hope. And also, I think it's because if we have all this great technology that's giving us that extra hope. I'm sorry if you can hear my talks.
Does he want my printer? Does he want my printout to chew on?
Yeah, we have hope in technology to help us to help us through this. Right now, Wounded Warrior Project, you know, all the events that we offered, you know, were in person, but we pivoted quickly to do everything virtually. So we're still bringing veterans together for this sense of connection. So they can bring 50 people into their living room now and do yoga from home, you know, as opposed to going to the event. You know, we have hope that we can bring and learn these new things. We're doing gardening classes online. And it's great because we have this technology. So we have hope and we have technology. And I think as long as we have those, we're going to continue to get better.
And along those lines, gratitude. All the things that I was complaining about in February, they're so petty now. I'm just really humbled and then really grateful for so many things that I wasn't before. So the hope and the gratitude, that positive outlook is really, really helpful.
Thank you.
I'll add one thought. And first of all, thank you, Roxanne, for bringing us all together. And it's nice to make two new friends in Jeremiah and Welby. What do we have? You said gratitude. And what was your word, Jeremiah?
Hope.
Hope. Okay. So I think that my word would be tools. Okay. There are things that you can do. I want to pick up on something that Welby has said a couple of times about thinking about yourself. We're in what I call a life quake. I categorize life quake, personal, voluntary or involuntary. This is an involuntary life quake. Personal and collective. This is a collective life quake. And when I did this, the smallest category was collective involuntary life quake. This is the first one that the entire planet has gone through in a century. Okay. In fact, there's a line in my book. If I'd done these conversations 100 years ago, we'd have 2 world wars and depression. We've kind of forgotten that. I think that a lot of the pain that the Vietnam veterans felt, even some of the pain, I think that the more recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan felt, was a sense that they were disconnected from the mainstream of the country. We're all going through this together. And there's actually some power in that, but it's also deceptive. Because while we are all going through the life quake together, the life transition that each of us is going through is going to be different. So that what Welby's going through, or Jeremiah, or anybody watching us, so we all have to decide, is my life transition, is it going to be work related? Is it family related? Do I want to stop drinking? Okay, do I want to start giving back more? So there are specific things that we can do. So it's not, hope is like the bedrock. Gratitude keeps us all recognizing that it's not all in our heads, that there is much beauty and health and safety that we have to be grateful for, but there actually are things that you can do. And so kind of my final message is that these transitions that we've been talking about here today, they work. 90% of the people that I talked to who went through all of what we've been talking about, cancer, PTSD, illness, lupus, job loss, economic hardship, losing loved ones, people do get through these. And so what I want to tell you is that there's a road ahead. There are things you can do, and we can get through this together.
Thank you, Bruce. Jeremiah and Welby, any other final thoughts you'd like to add?
I'm good.
I was just going to say thank you, Bruce and Welby, for your perspective and everything. And Roxanne, thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you to all of you. This has been an incredible conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you all the best. Thank you for being here. And to everyone listening, this is just session 1. There'll be 10 sessions, and you could go to our website, friendshealthconnection.org, for more information. Thank you to all of you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.